The mahogany doors of courtroom 2 billion in Manhattan Federal Courthouse swung open with an authoritative creak. Marcus Sterling's Italian leather shoes clicked against the polished floor, each step radiating the confidence that came with a $20 billion net worth. His Sterling technologies had revolutionized quantum computing, and now, at 35, he considered this antitrust lawsuit nothing more than an annoying blip in his empire's trajectory. All rise for the Honorable Judge Angela Washington. The bailiff's command echoed through the courtroom. Everyone stood, everyone except Marcus Sterling. He remained seated, steel-grey eyes fixed on his smartphone, thumb scrolling through market updates, as if court proceedings were merely an inconvenient calendar notification. Judge Angela Washington entered, her presence commanding immediate attention. 20 years on the federal bench had taught her to read a room instantly, and she didn't miss the seated figure at the defendant's table. Her eyes, sharp from decades of scrutinizing legal arguments, narrowed slightly at the deliberate display of disrespect. Mr. Sterling, her voice carried the weight of generations of hard-earned authority. In my courtroom, we observe certain protocols. Please stand. Marcus finally looked up, his lips curving into what barely passed for a smile. I stand for no one, Your Honor. My time is worth $160,000 per minute. Shall we proceed? A collective gasp rippled through the courtroom. Judge Washington's law clerk froze mid-step, legal briefs clutched to her chest. The bailiff's hand instinctively moved toward his hip. But Judge Washington's expression remained unchanged, like a chess master who had seen this opening gambit 1,000 times before. Very well, Mr. Sterling, she replied, her voice carrying a hint of something that made Marcus's eyebrow twitch. Was it amusement? Let's discuss exactly what time is worth in my courtroom. The tension crackled between them, a self-made billionaire who believed his wealth placed him above the law, and a judge who had spent her career proving that justice bows to no bank account. Neither realized that this moment would trigger a chain of events that would leave both their lives profoundly changed. In the gallery, reporters leaned forward, pens poised. This wasn't just another antitrust hearing anymore. This was becoming something else entirely, a collision between power and principle, with consequences that would ripple far beyond courtroom 2 billion's walls. Marcus Sterling's journey to wealth hadn't started in Silicon Valley, but in the harsh streets of Detroit. Born to a single mother who worked 3 jobs, he'd learned early that the world offered no handouts. By 12, he was fixing computers in his neighborhood, charging $5 per repair. His clients couldn't afford Geek Squad, and he couldn't afford to fail them. The same relentless drive that had kept him awake during those repair jobs now fueled his empire. Sterling Technologies had started in his college dorm room with a revolutionary quantum encryption algorithm. 10 years later, his company dominated the tech landscape, and Marcus dominated boardrooms with the same ruthless efficiency his code brought to computers. Sir James Patterson, his lawyer, whispered urgently, "This isn't a corporate takeover. You can't strong-arm a federal judge." Patterson had represented Sterling Technologies since its IPO, watching his brilliant but difficult client transform from a hungry innovator into something harder, colder. The lawyer's receding hairline and perpetual worry lines were testament to years of damage control. Marcus ignored him, his attention fixed on Judge Washington. The woman's composure irritated him. He was used to people bending, breaking, or at least showing fear. But her dark eyes held something else entirely: certainty. Behind the bench, Angela Washington carried her own history of defiance. Her father, a civil rights attorney in the 1960s, had taught her that justice wasn't a gift from the powerful but a right worth fighting for. She'd graduated top of her class at Harvard Law while working 2 jobs, prosecuted corrupt politicians, and earned her federal appointment through a combination of brilliant legal mind and unshakable integrity. Your Honor, her clerk, Sarah Chen, approached with a stack of precedent cases. Sarah had worked with Judge Washington for 3 years, learning that her mentor's seemingly infinite patience had very definite limits. She'd seen that same look in the judge's eyes once before, when a corrupt senator had tried to claim immunity. That case had ended with headlines and handcuffs. Officer Robert Martinez, the bailiff, stood ready, his 20 years of courthouse experience telling him this situation could escalate quickly. He'd seen all types in courtroom: 2 billion drug lords, mob bosses, white-collar criminals, but something about Sterling's arrogance set him on edge. The billionaire's security detail, 3 suits with earpieces hovering near the gallery entrance didn't help his nerves. Counsel Judge Washington addressed Patterson. Does your client understand that contempt of court carries real consequences, regardless of one's net worth? Patterson's forehead glistened with sweat. Your Honor, if we could request a brief recess. We're not requesting anything. Marcus cut in, his voice carrying the same tone he used to fire underperforming executives. I'm here as a courtesy. My company's legal team has already filed appeals that will tie this case up for years. Your Honor's time might be better spent on matters she can actually influence. A soft murmur rippled through the courthouse staff. Maria Gonzalez, the court reporter, had transcribed thousands of proceedings, but her fingers paused over the stenotype machine. In 26 years, she'd never heard anyone address Judge Washington with such blatant disrespect. The judge's longtime security officer, Thomas Jefferson, shifted his weight by the side door. He'd protected her since her days as a district court judge, through death threats and attempted intimidation. But this was different, a threat not to her safety, but to everything she stood for. Mr. Sterling, Judge Washington's voice remained measured. You've built your fortune on understanding systems, haven't you? Complex codes, intricate algorithms, the fundamental rules that make things work. She leaned forward slightly, her silver-streaked hair catching the fluorescent light. The law is also a system, one far older and more tested than any computer code. And like any good system, it has protocols for dealing with anomalies. The subtle emphasis on anomalies made Patterson wince. He'd warned Marcus about this, had practically begged him to show basic respect. But his client had dismissed him with the same wave he used to reject acquisition offers. They all fold eventually. It's just a matter of finding the right pressure point. What Marcus failed to grasp, what Patterson could see clearly in Judge Washington's steady gaze, was that some things couldn't be bought, bullied, or bypassed. Some principles, forged in the fires of struggle and sacrifice, were unbreakable. The antitrust hearing had barely begun when Marcus Sterling's phone buzzed for the 3rd time. He answered it openly, his voice cutting through Judge Washington's preliminary remarks. Sterling here. Yes, proceed with the Singapore acquisition. Judge Washington paused mid-sentence. The courtroom fell silent except for Marcus's conversation. Mr. Sterling, she said, her tone carrying decades of judicial authority, end your call immediately. He held up one finger in the universal wait gesture, continuing his conversation. Set the offer at $40 billion. They'll counter at 35. We'll close at 37.5. Officer Martinez stepped forward, hand resting on his belt. Sarah Chen, the clerk, exchanged worried glances with James Patterson, who was frantically scribbling notes to his client. Very well, Marcus concluded, ending his call. Sorry for the interruption, Your Honor. That just added $6 billion to my company's value. Shall we continue? Judge Washington's response was measured, each word precisely chosen. Mr. Sterling, this courtroom operates under rules that predate both your wealth and your apparent belief that they don't apply to you. Stand when you address this court. Rules. Marcus's laugh held no humor. Rules are for people who lack the vision to break them. Did Edison follow rules? Did Jobs? Gates? Musk? The visionaries who changed the world did it by ignoring small-minded constraints. Patterson grabbed his client's arm. Marcus, please. Remove your hand, James. Marcus snapped. I'm not one of your regular clients who trembles at the sight of a gavel. Do you know what I did this morning, Your Honor? I launched a satellite network that will bring internet to 3 billion people. Last week. My quantum computers broke encryption standards that governments thought would last centuries. The week before that. Mr. Sterling, Judge Washington interrupted, approached the bench. He remained seated. Why? So you can lecture me about respect, about tradition. I'm creating the future while this court clings to the past. Do you think I became the youngest self-made billionaire by following rules? The gallery erupted in whispers. Court reporters leaned forward, knowing tomorrow's headlines were writing themselves. Judge Washington raised her gavel, but didn't bring it down. Your achievements are noted, she said, her voice cutting through the murmurs. Now, let me tell you what I did this morning. I reviewed a case where a single mother lost her life savings to a tech company's data breach. Last week I heard arguments about AI algorithms discriminating against minority loan applicants. The week before that, I ruled on privacy violations affecting millions of users. She leaned forward. You see, Mr. Sterling, while you're creating the future, this court ensures that future serves everyone, not just those who can afford your vision. Now, for the last time, stand. When you address this. Marcus rose slowly, not in respect but challenge. Or what, Your Honor? You'll find me in contempt. My lawyers will have any ruling overturned before your gavel hits the sound block. Your jurisdiction is as outdated as this building's wiring. The silence that followed was absolute. Judge Washington studied him for a long moment, then removed her glasses with deliberate care. Officer Martinez, please clear the courtroom. Mr. Patterson, you may stay. Everyone else, including Mr. Sterling's security detail, will exit immediately. The audience filed out, tension crackling in their wake. Marcus's security team hesitated until Judge Washington's stern glance sent them backing through the doors. Now, Mr. Sterling, she said once the room was empty save for Martinez, Patterson, and her clerk, let's discuss the difference between wealth and power. Wealth is what you have. Power is what I'm about to demonstrate. Officer Martinez, take Mr. Sterling's phone. You can't, Marcus started. I just did. And for the next 24 hours, you'll experience what life is like for those who can't buy their way past the rules. Officer Martinez, escort Mr. Sterling to holding for contempt of court. Perhaps a night without his satellites and quantum computers will help him appreciate the more traditional aspects of our legal system. Tech titan in lookup Sterling meets steel bars blazed across the New York Times digital headlines. Marcus Sterling sat in the holding cell, his Tom Ford suit collecting dust on the concrete bench. Through the small window, he could see the courthouse's media circus growing by the hour. The judge is willing to release you immediately, James Patterson said through the cell bars, if you apologize and agree to follow court protocols. Marcus clenched his jaw. She's bluffing. Call the governor. Already tried. Along with 2 senators and the Attorney General, Patterson loosened his tie. They all said the same thing: Judge Washington's courtroom, Judge Washington's rules. Sterling Technologies' stock had dropped 12 points since morning. Sterling Down was trending globally, with social media flooded with memes of his courtroom performance. Activist investors were calling emergency board meetings. In her chambers, Judge Washington reviewed the mounting media coverage on her clerk's tablet. CNN featured legal experts debating judicial authority versus corporate power. Fox News questioned whether she had overstepped. MSNBC praised her stand against billionaire impunity. Your Honor, Sarah Chen ventured. Sterling's team has filed 17 emergency motions in the last hour. File them appropriately, Judge Washington replied. In chronological order, her calm masked deeper concerns. This had become more than a simple contempt charge. It was evolving into a referendum on wealth, power, and justice itself. Outside, protesters gathered. Tax the rich signs competed with free Sterling banners. Reddit threads exploded with debates about judicial overreach and corporate accountability. Sterling Technologies employees watched their stock options fluctuate wildly. In his cell, Marcus paced. Each step on the cold concrete floor echoed with memories he'd spent years burying. The homeless shelter where he'd spent his 13th birthday, the community college computer lab where he'd coded his first program, the corner store where... He stopped pacing. The corner store, Detroit. 1992. Patterson, he called out, his voice different now. Get me Judge Washington's public service record. Everything from Detroit, early 90s. His lawyer returned an hour later, pale. Marcus, you need to see this. The documents confirmed what something in him had recognized from the start. Judge Angela Washington was connected to his past in ways that made his current predicament seem like cosmic irony. Meanwhile, social media dissected his every known move. Old interviews resurfaced, showing a pattern of dismissing regulations, mocking authority, treating fines as mere operational costs. But other clips emerged to his early days, speaking at community colleges, mentoring young programmers from disadvantaged backgrounds. So his PR chief texted Patterson, "We're hemorrhaging public support. The judge's background is resonating with people. Her father was a civil rights lawyer, her mother a public school teacher. She worked her way through law school." Next to her story, Mr. Sterling's behavior seems entitled Marcus finished, reading over Patterson's shoulder. "I've become everything I used to hate." The holding cell's silence was broken by approaching footsteps. Officer Martinez appeared with Judge Washington herself. "Mr. Sterling," she said, "I believe we need to have a conversation about dignity, respect, and a corner store in Detroit." Marcus Sterling, the man who'd refused to stand, found himself unable to sit. Because now he remembered not just the store, but the man behind the counter. The man who'd given a hungry kid a chance instead of calling the cops. Judge Washington's father. Judge Washington's chambers felt smaller than Marcus expected. No marble columns or gold fixtures, just walls of law books and a few family photos. One caught his eye, a storefront he'd tried to forget, Washington's Corner Market written above the door in faded paint. "You were skinny back then," Judge Washington said, following his gaze. 16, scared and trying to steal a loaf of bread. Marcus's hands trembled. "Your father could have called the police. Should have, according to some. Instead, he offered you a job." She picked up the photo. "He said he saw something in your eyes, not hunger for food, but hunger for a chance." "I worked there 8 months," Marcus whispered. "Every afternoon after school. Your father taught me about inventory, cash flow, basic business. And respect," she added. "He always said dignity isn't bought, it's earned and given freely." Marcus sank into a chair, his billion-dollar armor cracking. "I left without saying goodbye. The night I got my scholarship to MIT, I was ashamed of having someone believe in you, or of needing help. I built Sterling Technologies on the premise that I did it all alone. Self-made billionaire. But your father." Judge Washington opened her desk drawer and withdrew a yellowed envelope. "You left this. Dad kept it all these years." Marcus recognized his teenage handwriting. "Mr. Washington, thank you for everything. The $157.43 in this envelope is every penny you paid me, plus interest. Use it to help someone else. MS." "He never spent it," she said softly. "Said it wasn't about the money. He used that letter to teach me about seeing the person behind the circumstance. When I became a judge," he said, "remember the boy who became more than his worst moment." Tears rolled down Marcus's cheeks. "Is he? He passed last year. His last words were about you, actually. He'd read about Sterling Technologies' success. Said, I wonder if that boy remembers what it's like to stand up for someone else." The weight of those words, of decades of buried gratitude, crashed through Marcus's carefully constructed walls. Here he sat, in the chambers of the daughter of the man who'd saved him, having dishonored everything that made his success possible. "I forgot who I was," he admitted. "Somewhere between the IPO and the Forbes cover, I became what I once despised." Judge Washington touched the photo one last time. "Then perhaps it's time to remember, not just where you are, Mr. Sterling, but how you got here, and who helped you stand when you couldn't stand alone." When Marcus Sterling walked back into courtroom 2 billion the next morning, the room fell silent. His usual entourage was absent, the designer suit replaced by a simple black one. Without a word, he walked to the center of the courtroom and knelt. "Your Honor," his voice carried to every corner, "I owe this court, and you, an apology. But more than that, I owe gratitude to a man I never properly thanked." The reporter's pen scratched furiously as Marcus rose, facing not just the bench but the packed gallery. 30 years ago, Henry Washington gave a desperate kid a chance. He taught me about dignity when I had none, about respect when I deserved none. Yesterday in this courtroom I dishonored his legacy and everything he stood for." Judge Washington remained still, but her eyes held the same compassion her father's had shown decades ago. "My success story isn't just about code and algorithms," Marcus continued. "It's about a corner store owner who saw potential in a thief, who taught me that true power isn't in what you demand, but in what you give." He turned to address the cameras directly. "Sterling Technologies will establish the Henry Washington Foundation with an initial endowment of $1 billion. Not for tech startups or quantum computing, but for small business owners who see potential in people society has given up on." The social media response was immediate. Sterling stands trended worldwide. His company's stock began to climb. Furthermore, "Bon," he faced Judge Washington again. "I ask the court's permission to expand the antitrust hearing scope. Sterling Technologies hasn't just been aggressive in business, we've forgotten our responsibility to the communities we serve. I'm ready to accept whatever measures this court deems necessary to ensure we remember that." responsibility. Patterson dropped his legal pad in shock. The gallery erupted in murmurs. Finally, Marcus's voice softened. To the daughter of the man who changed my life, I stand for you now, Your Honor, as I should have stood before. Not because of your position, but because dignity recognizes dignity. And your father's lessons live on through you. The antitrust hearing concluded 3 weeks later with unprecedented terms. Sterling Technologies voluntarily split into 3 entities, each with dedicated oversight boards including community representatives. The Henry Washington Foundation launched with local chapters in 50 cities, focusing on small business mentorship in underserved areas. Judge Washington's final ruling became required reading in law schools. Justice serves not just to constrain power, but to remind power of its purpose. When wealth remembers its roots, when privilege recalls its obligations, transformation becomes possible. Marcus kept the corner store photo on his new office wall. His company's quarterly meetings now started with employees sharing stories of impact, not profit margins. The sight of him standing whenever Judge Washington entered her courtroom became a symbol of tech sector accountability. 1 year later, at the Foundation's first graduation ceremony, Marcus stood beside Judge Washington as they awarded grants to 100 small business owners. Among them was a young woman opening a computer repair shop in Detroit, on the same street where a corner store once stood. The greatest power, Marcus told the graduates, isn't in refusing to stand, it's in helping others rise. The media dubbed it the Washington effect as other tech billionaires followed suit, establishing similar programs. But in Courtroom 2 Billion, a simple plaque said it best: dignity given freely returns 1,000-fold.